continuing with the solution to this initial value problem. So right, we had this difference equation, we had some initial conditions, and we were able to figure out the general solution, which had some nasty exponents, right? They didn't just come out as integers. And then we also used the initial conditions with the general solution to come up with two equations we had to solve for C1 and C2. First one wasn't so bad, second one, a lot worse. And now the idea is, to actually solve these. So to do that, the easiest thing usually is to add the equations together so you either get rid of all the C1s or all the C2s. So in this case, I want to take the negative on this one. This has a 1 in front, so I'm going to take, positive 2 minus square root of 6 times the first equation. So I have positive 2 minus square root of 6 times the first equation. I'm going to add that to the second equation. Right, and I picked the 2 minus square root of 6 to be the negative. That one's the C1s cancel. So if we do that, we'll end up with, let's say we have 2 minus square root of 6 times C1 plus 2 minus square root of 6 times C2 equals 3 times 2 minus square root of 6. Now on the bottom, I'm just going to recopy. This is the first equation times the 2 minus square root of 6. I'm just going to recopy the bottom equation. So that's negative 2 plus square root of 6, C1. And I have plus negative 2 minus square root of 6, C2 equals negative 4. All right, I'm going to add those together. So 2 minus square root of 6 plus negative 2 plus square root of 6, those cancel. I just get 0, C1. And on this one, I get a 2 plus negative 2, so I don't have any of that left, but I have a negative 6 plus, square root of negative square root of 6 plus another negative square root of 6. So I end up with minus 2 square root of 6 times C2 equals, well, okay, in this one, we have 3 times 2, that's 6. Positive 6 plus negative 4, that's going to be positive 2. Then 3 times negative square root of 6, so minus 3 square root of 6. All right, and then we can actually simplify this a little. So that's, C2 is equal to 2 minus 3 square root of 6 over negative 2 square root of 6. Okay, let's try and simplify that as much as we can because we're going to have to solve for C1 as well. So let's see, so C2 equals, okay, so I'm going to take, it's 2 minus 3 square root of 6 over negative 2 square root of 6. I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 6 to try and get the square root out of the bottom. So that ends up being, let's see, we have a 2 square root of 6 minus 3 times 6, because the square root of 6 times square root of 6 is 6. And on the bottom, we get negative 2 times 6, right, from square root of 6 times square root of 6. Well, that ends up equaling, let's see, 2 square root of 6 minus 18 all over negative 12. Yeah. And then, let's see, let's take a negative out. So this is the same as 18 minus 2 square root of 6 all over positive 12. And we can actually take a 2 out of that everywhere. Ends up being 9 minus square root of 6 over 6. Okay, it's probably about as simple as it'll get. So got C2 and simplified it. Now let's go back and pick the easier equation to plug in C2 for to try and solve for C1. So the second equation, that one looks terrible. The first equation though, that one's, is about as nice as we could ask for. So the first equation, we have C1 plus C2 equals 3. We don't know what C1 is, but we know what C2 is. So we can do our plus 9 minus square root of 6 over 6 is equal to 3. All right, well, let's see. So C1 is equal to, let's see, 3 minus 9, and I gotta put that in parentheses just to keep the minuses straight. So 9 minus square root of 6 over 6. Okay, well, that's 3. I'll change the minuses here, so what that's going to be, that's going to plus negative 9 plus square root of 6 over 6. If I make a common denominator, that ends up being, right, so if I multiply this by 6 over 6, I get 18 over 6 plus negative 9 plus square root of 6 over 6. So that ends up being positive 9 plus square root of 6 over 6. All right, so then the general solution ends up being, sorry, the solution to this initial value problem, not the general solution, ends up being y of x equals, I think I'll be able to fit it all. So C1, going back to the general solution way over here, we have 9 plus square root of 6 over 6 times e to the, that was the negative 2, plus square root of 6 times x, plus our C2 was 9 minus square root of 6 over 6 times e to the negative 2 minus square root of 6, x. All right, so barely managed to fit that into the second page, but this is how you would in general solve it. So you start with your initial value problem, you make the characteristic polynomial, you get your general solution, then you use your initial conditions to make two equations for two unknowns in the C1 and C2. Then you have to go through and solve for C1 and C2 in that system of equations. Typically the easiest way to do that is to add the equations together, but multiplying one of them to cancel out one of the terms, C2, and then you go back and you substitute the constant you solved for into one of the easier equations to solve for the remaining constant. Finally, you solve for that constant, and then you write down the whole solution after that.